Welcome everyone to Galerie Myrtis and our discussion this afternoon with Charly Palmer as we venture into What Is Your Tar Baby? This phenomenal exhibition, the entire body of work has been created by Charly. And we'll begin the discussion with just delving into his background a little bit. Charly, you were born in Alabama, raised in Milwaukee, but have spent the last 20 years in Atlanta. So I wonder how that experience has influenced your art.
Sorry. First, let me, just for a moment, I want to thank Myrtis for this opportunity. I don't know if it's recorded anywhere in the catalog or anything about how this connection first happened. But Troy, who I think is here somewhere, yeah. Troy really talked me into coming to Baltimore to visit. I apologize to the folks from Baltimore, but I saw no reason to come to Baltimore. And he kept saying there's a lot of things going on here, so I came for a visit. And while I was here, he said, we need to go to Myrtis' gallery. And Alex was here at the time, and we came in and looked at the gallery. It was a fantastic gallery. And saw the gallery, loved it, complimented her, and was actually on my way out the door, and she said, why don't you stay for a while? And so we sat back in the kitchen area, and we began to have this conversation. And the conversation was about this dream and this thought of Tar Baby. At the time, Tar Baby hadn't happened, but I had this idea in my head. And as we began to really talk about politics and art and everything, it became really clear, because one of the thoughts I had about the body of work, that if this body of work happened, I didn't want to have it split up. I wanted it to be seen in one place. And by the time the conversation was over with, Myrtis said, I want this show. And I'm like, and for me, it was like she immediately understood where I was coming from, so it was a done deal. And so that's where it started. And then, months later, this is what you got. But it had everything to do with this relationship with this amazing lady who saw the vision, understood where I was coming from, and was willing to, the other thing was like, initially the show was going to be called Tar Baby, which could be very offensive to a lot of people. And she said, I'm not afraid of controversy. I'm like, neither am I, let's do this. Mm-hmm. And so I want to thank you for this opportunity and that chance to show my work.
Alex and I, I've said this to you before, that Alex and I are really proud and honored to house your genius. This body of work is phenomenal, it's powerful, it's thought-provoking, and we're really happy to be behind it.
Now I'm trying to remember the question.
Yeah. So this is going to be a very informal discussion, but I thought that if you would tell us a little bit about your background, that would help to contextualize who you are as an artist and kind of allow us to get in your head in terms of your creative process.
Being born in Alabama, I always had a connection to the South. My parents and my family left Alabama when I was 4 years old. I'm a 60s baby, so I was born in 1960. So having experiences like the Jim Crow laws that still existed during my time, whenever we would come back north, there was always this dividing line when we got into an area that was clearly the South. And our parents spent a lot of time cautioning us to be careful about certain things. And so if you know the body of work that I've created even prior to Tar Baby, it had a lot to do with the struggle, the experience of an African and African American. And so this came with the whole idea of the story of the griot. I've always been a lover of great stories and storytellers. And so I always connected to the whole Brer Rabbit story. Again, coming from the South, understanding the history of that, when I came across this book that had folklore and old Negro spirituals in it, I started reading some Tar Baby stories and the Brer Rabbit, and started to initially come up with the idea of just taking each of these stories and making it more contemporary. What would it look like in modern day society? But I got to that one piece, and that one piece was the Cornel West. And Cornel West had asked the question before, and he mentioned in particular President Obama getting into this position that he's gotten into as the President of the United States, but he also got very much stuck in the sticky stuff, using the tar as a metaphor. And so I began to kind of not necessarily want to tell the story, of each of these individuals, each one of these pieces, but to create people in particular that had some controversy or some history behind them, create the piece and then let the viewer tell their story. How do you connect with it? How do you see certain people, and what was their tar? What was their sticky stuff?
So let me interrupt you for a moment, because I want you to tell those who are not familiar with the story, because that is, you know, the foundation from which this body of work sprang. And I've actually encountered people who are not familiar with the story of Burr Fox and Burr Rabbit and the Tar Baby.
The amazing thing about the whole Brer Rabbit stories is they're as old as 500 years, probably before then. They originated in Africa, and so any nation of color, of dark complexion, whether it's even Cuba or the Caribbean, they may have a different name for Brer Rabbit or Brother Rabbit, but they all have these stories in connection, or they have some kind of connection to these stories. And when I first started doing the research on the Brer Rabbit story in particular, one of the things, and these stories are being told on so many different levels, but one of the things that just really truly fascinated me is on how many ways you can break down the understanding of the Brer Rabbit story. And the Brer Rabbit story simply is saying that there is this mischievous rabbit who's always into things, always tricking other animals, and Brer Fox has gotten really fed up with his antics and decides he's going to catch him finally. And so what he does is he gets, a doll and dips it in tar, places it on a road where he knows that Brer Rabbit is always going to travel, knowing that the type of character Brer Rabbit was going to encounter and try to engage the Tar Baby. After an attempt to talk to him, tell him jokes, whatever, he felt as if he was being disrespected by this doll, this person, and so he gets upset, gets frustrated, grabs him to punch him, gets stuck in the tar, tries to kick off, gets foot stuck, suddenly he's wrapped in tar, and then Brer Fox comes out and says, I finally got you. And so there's always a moral to a Brer Rabbit story, but the funny thing that a lot of people also don't remember about the story, that ultimately, in the end, Brer Rabbit still tricks him. He says, like, whatever you do, don't throw me in a bear patch. So Brer Fox says, okay, that's the ideal place to throw you. So he throws him in, he gets out because of the weeds and everything. He's able to disengage himself from the tar and says once again that he's victorious. But that metaphor about those difficult decisions that we've had to make in our lives, ones that have really altered our lives, is where I'm coming from. And when Obama said, when Cornel West said Obama is now stuck in the sticky stuff, it was that aha moment for me. I need to explore this.
And so the meeting, going back to the encounter with Tar Baby and Burr Rabbit, this piece was inspired by the encounter of those two.
Right.
Okay.
I actually those. We were talking last night. I collect action figures. Don't call them dogs. And I was actually going to at one point actually build a Brer Rabbit and a Tar Baby. But I went on the internet and found these dolls that were smaller. My action figures are about 12 inches. And I bought them, and I sat and looked at them for the longest, put them in my studio, and wanted them to speak to me. And they did. I began to kind of see how they would be part of each piece. And if you look carefully, they somehow appear in most of the pieces. And those are the actual dolls. I actually took them outside and took photographs at different angles and everything, and then assembled this. But not thinking, and we talked about that yesterday, that it would be a piece that would even be a popular piece that anybody would be interested in. And discovered that it's probably one of the more popular pieces in the whole body of work. I thought it was just a simple story. And I just wanted to, for people that weren't familiar, at least show the initial meeting of Brer Rabbit and Tar Baby.
So let's go through and talk about some of the figures who have become the narrative in this body of work. And let's begin with the politicians and the scholars. And you've already touched on the Cornel West piece and the statement that he made in the church. Would you share that with us?
I've always had, I don't know if I ever told you the conversation I had.
Yes, you did. I'll share it again.
All right. I'm sorry. This is a very intimate conversation. Let's talk for a while. When I did, there are actually, I think it's Martin Luther King, project a little Martin Luther King, and Muhammad Ali, and a couple other pieces were part of what I considered the Brer Rabbit series. When I got to Cornel West was when I started really thinking about, let's just pursue this one story. But what had happened was I had spoken to a friend of mine who lives in LA, and I told him about this whole series that I was thinking about doing as well. And one day I was sitting in my studio on a Friday night painting. I don't think I was working on Charly, but I was working on something else. And my phone rings, and it's my friend in LA. And he says, actually, he doesn't call me, he texts me and says, you won't believe who's sitting in front of me. He was at some event. He says, email me that Cornel West painting. And so I emailed it to him, and then about a half an hour later, I'm back in my studio painting, and my phone rings, and it's my guy on the phone. His name is Terrell Tilford, but Terrell's on the phone, and he says, hold on, I got somebody that wants to speak to you. And I'm listening, and then the voice immediately says, my brother. And I'm like, I had a friend of mine was sitting in my studio with me, and he's sitting over there, but he saw my reaction, and he's like, what? And I'm like, okay, this is personal. I have to kind of like, excuse me. I leave and I go into the other room, and we sit down, and I listen to him, and he got it. I mean, he really got where I was coming from in this piece, because my first thought was, if Cornel saw this and saw Tar Baby, would he be offended? Would he think I was saying something different than what I was really saying? But he obviously got it. But he got it on several different levels. But I'm sitting on the phone, and I'm awestruck, and I don't really even know what to say, because he's going off on how powerful, how important the work was, and how much. And I'm just like, I can't believe this. And I think at the same time, Terrell is an actor. And they're like, this is going to be really mean if this is Terrell doing a Cornel West. And then I realized, I say, no, this actually is Cornel West on the wall. And so, but I'm like, so we spoke for a little bit, and I told him I wanted to pursue this a little bit, and I wanted to do a couple more. And he says, my blessings are with you, and I hope it goes well. And that was the end of it. But it was one of those things that I pretty much got his blessing. He understood where I was coming from. Just as I've said, Tar Baby, if it offends people, it's because you probably don't know the story, because the original story had nothing to do with race. It became a race issue for many people, but initially it had nothing to do with race. And Cornel understood the whole idea of the sticky stuff.
Well, with that statement, I'm going to refer to this extraordinary essay in the catalog that was written by Horace Ballard, who unfortunately had a death in the family. He was scheduled to be with us today, and is not here. So I'm going to, as we go through this discussion, draw from his essay. And one of the statements he makes, and I quote, Palmer emphatically pushes against a racialized interpretation of Tar Baby, though he remains conscious of the way in which the phrase has been conscripted into an American epitaph. And so we are not dealing with it as this racial epitaph. We're such a race-based society, and that's where most people's thoughts go. But you've taken it back to the origin of the story, and you use that as a metaphor for the sticky situations, our convictions, those things that we become entangled by. So I'm going to go now to, speaking of becoming entangled in tar, Mr. President, tell us about this piece.
This piece, when I think about it, you said tangle, and I'm looking at it now, and there's some woven things that are going on around him that I can say this to anybody who wants to be an artist, a writer, or anything that's artistic when it comes to expression. If you acknowledge that there's a higher source, then your work will go to another level, because you learn to simply get out of the way and let it happen to you. And so often I look at certain pieces and I see things that I don't recall painting, and I see the levels, when Horace wrote his essays, the level of what this meant. And it really impressed me. It impressed me because I knew at that point it was confirmed that this was all God. That this was greater than me as an artist. It's more important than me as an artist. It's about the story. And when I thought about the President of the United States, everyone has noticed that he's grayed quite a bit in a year and a half. That he doesn't look as happy as he once did. And so I wanted to kind of tell that story. You know, it's even, if you notice, I should look back there and check, or look at the, okay. I was gonna say, I'm almost certain that Tar Baby's sitting on his shoulder. And that's somewhat intentional when it comes to, a lot of times the compositions are spontaneous, but in that case, I consciously wanted him on the shoulder. I almost thought about putting Brer Rabbit on the other shoulder. I thought about, quite honestly, putting George Bush on the other shoulder. You know, there were all these kinds of things, but it's like, you know what, go with what feels right now, and this is what feels right. Let the viewer complete that story. And so I didn't want to get too involved. Sometimes I try not to clutter with too much information.
And then this piece, which is someone that Obama idolized, but you have a different interpretation and impression of Lincoln.
You know, if you know Abraham Lincoln's history, and I think he was a great president, I'm not taking that from him, but if you know his history, you'll understand that one of the things, Abraham Lincoln didn't believe that black men were courageous enough to fight in the war. He brought in black soldiers by necessity. And also, I just recently found this out watching a PBS special. When Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, or the African, he didn't free all the Africans. For example, I think it was Missouri, because it was a bordering state. He didn't take those slave owners Africans away. And so it wasn't because he recognized that slavery was wrong, but and he also believed, and he actually had formulated a bill that was never presented to Congress, that was the idea of free that black man or the African, set up a separate nation or send them back to Africa. He didn't think that black Africans and white Americans could coexist. And so it's like, I can't put a man that believes these things or see him as my hero. You know, and again, many things about him I admire, just as I think President Obama does, but there are certain things that's like, I cannot put this man on a level as a hero to me. So that's why, I mean, I went as far as to even title the piece, He's No Hero to Me.
And then while we say that, and while you're not using the term tar baby as a racial epithet and quoting you, sometimes the tar is simply being black.
Right.
And that I refer to Professor Gates instead.
I remember a quote by Don King, and he used the N-word. N-word, quite honestly, is my least favorite word. I absolutely hate the N-word, and so I can't use it, won't use it. But he said that in the eyes of certain people, if you're the N-word, you'll always be the N-word. Whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, you'll always be that N-word. And so thinking about that and thinking about the amazing Professor Gates, that day he became just the N-word in this man's eyes, because he didn't see this accomplished, respected man all over the world. He saw just a Negro trying to break into a house, or a man being belligerent almost for the right reasons. And so I needed to recognize that, at least in one piece, where it's like sometimes just simply being of African descent can be, your tar. Bless you.
And now let's go on and look at the role of scholars and political activists in your work. And Angela Davis, which I love this piece, The Revolutionary, and her story.
One of the important pieces in this is not taking away from Angela, but Fannie Lou Hamer is in her afro. And a lot of people don't even know who she is. And I've loved her, I've always admired her, and I always try to tell her story indirectly. And it's all about the unsung heroes, those people down south that were everyday people that stood up against the police and whatever corruption and were brave enough, whether educated or not, but knew right from wrong. And those are the people I wanted to honor. And so as much as I was speaking and honoring Angela Davis in this piece, I've been wanting to do Fannie Lou for the longest, Fannie Lou Hamer, and so this was one of the chances to subtly interject her into the story. But it's about purpose, and it's about sometimes taking a position that is not popular, but taking a position because you believe in it. And that's what I always think about when I think about Angela Davis.
And another figure, Malcolm X, who took a stance and against racism. Tell us why he became a figure
I can't explain my own background because my parents weren't Black conscious, but I always was. You know, and as a kid, there were two people that I always loved as a kid. That was Jack Johnson. Can't tell you why. Even at 12 years old, I just thought he was fascinating to me. And Malcolm X. And read the autobiography when I was 14 and just thought this guy was absolutely amazing. And it was about this man and that turning point in his life when he was told that as a young kid who was the head of his class, it was mostly white, when he said, I want to be an attorney. And his teacher said, you can't aim that high. And it devastated him and altered the whole course of his life, because then he became a drug addict and a drug dealer and eventually ended up in jail. But in jail, began to seek knowledge. And in that knowledge and understanding of religion and everything like that, became this amazing man. And so I've always admired that about him. And so, again, there are times I would ask the viewer, I'm not certain what or who, how I want to describe anybody's particular tar baby. In the case of Malcolm X, I really wouldn't know, but I know he fits in there somewhere. You know, because he faced and confronted a lot of demons at times and a lot of controversy and difficult decisions.
Yes. And then the complete opposite approach, but still very profound, is Martin Luther King.
I would get in trouble if I really went into Martin Luther King, I think.
Go ahead.
There's a lot of controversy that was revealed later on about some of the things that Dr. King did. But I'll say this about Dr. King. When I began to hear the controversial things that he was involved with, and including not being faithful to his wife, he became human to me. And for the first time, I began to believe, and I was young again, like 14, 15, when I began to hear these rumors. And he began to appear to be human to me. When he became human to me, then greater goals became possible to myself. Because when I put him on the status of God, it was something that I felt was unachievable. I could not do this because, you know, this is a great man that was beyond the average man. And I'm not saying that Dr. King was an average man, but the fact that he was human made it something that was more achievable for me. And so that had always been an inspiration to me. And like I said, never say, like, this is more stating something publicly. As much as he was an inspiration, he was also human. And one of the phrases that Cornel West had come up with in referring to Martin Luther King was he called society or America has classified him, has made him like a Santa Claus hero without any human qualities. And we've made him we celebrate a holiday and everything, but we don't realize that he was also a human being and made difficult decisions at times and did some controversial things at the same time. You know, I have, again, love and respect for Martin Luther King, but I also understood that he was a human being.
And then the Adolf Hitler piece and why he.
I just want controversy.
Yes.
You know, again, if you're reading history, I love history. If you read history, it's obvious that this man hated himself. You know, when you describe the perfect Aryan, he was everything opposite of it. You know, tall, stature, athletic, blonde, blue eyes, none of these things. Pale skin. His description was probably more Jewish than what the Aryan described. And I'm like, okay, how did this man become leader? Of this movement. And so I think that's what I'm trying to tell anything. I think it can be self-loathing. Anybody who you can think of that is displayed it, but I think he was probably one of the most obvious to me. When I look at Adolf Hitler, he obviously did not love himself.
And moving on, we'll look at the lives of artists and activists and Josephine Baker.
When you look at artists in general, it's like it seems that we as musicians or dancers or even painters, sometimes I've discovered more respect when we've left this country, because it seems like there's more appreciation for what we do when it's come to jazz music, or even Josephine. She paved the way on so many different levels, but she had to do it outside of this country because there still is, even to this day, there's a color line that divides a lot of what we're capable of. But not that we're capable, but we're allowed to or able to accomplish. And so, if you notice, Josephine is one of the, and maybe the only person that's like done twice,
Yes.
right? Because I was always intrigued by the woman, by the artist, and by what her daring, her boldness, her willingness to freely express herself as an artist. You know, again, she would never have been able to do that here. You know.
Yes, absolutely. And James Baldwin.
I love James Baldwin's face. You know, there's a lot of controversy or a lot of things that may be connected to him. An amazing writer. You know, he was very much an activist who took a stand very clearly, but I always loved his face. And so, I could give you all kinds of different reasons, but I wanted to paint his face. And his face, and there's a series of, I think, about 6 or so pieces that are sepia, just sepia color. And a lot of the works, I might start off with a sepia tone and then add color to it. James Baldwin was the first that I started with the sepia, looked at it and said, I don't want to do anything more to this. And so that's what inspired me to do a series of sepia color pieces, was the James Baldwin piece.
And then there are artists amongst the group who are very controversial in their lyrics, and one being Nina Simone.
I grew up loving Nina Simone's music. It may sound odd, but not knowing that Nina Simone was a woman because of her baritone and voice, and powerful voice. But there was a song that always haunted me, and that was For Women. I actually did a larger painting with 4 women. But she was, again, another one of those artists that is only within the last 25 years or so being really appreciated for her genius. But again, if you talk to people in Europe, you know, and France and stuff like that, they love and always have loved her work. And so again, it probably is acknowledging that person who one of my, there's a song, it's called Mississippi Goddamn.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
I love that song.
Yes.
You know, and so some of the lyrics, some of the honesty, some of the truth about it is, I think, one of those things I'm acknowledging and just doing her. You know, I love, again, the face. I love the attitude. I love a lot of things about her, but, you know, it was like the music that has inspired me to want to do something with her.
I love that song too, and I think one of the lines is that this is a show tune and the show hasn't been written for it yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm determined I'm going to write that show for that song. I love
see
it.
that.
Yeah. And another musician and singer who had very politically charged lyrics was Fela Kuti.
Mm-hmm. Fela and Bob Marley lives parallel themselves in so many different ways because they were both musicians that took a political stance against the majority of the government at the time. His home, as Marley's, was raided by the police, and in Fela's case, his mom was tossed out of a window and killed. But Fela's music is still some of the greatest music out there, and it's amazing to find out so many people who don't know who Fela is. But if you've had a chance, if you haven't had a chance, I don't even know if it's still there, but the play on Broadway, Fela's play, is absolutely incredible on every level. It's great music, great acting, the set design and everything. But I was at that play when I immediately, when listening to the story, because I didn't know his story, began to say, Tar Baby. Again, a man that was confronted with a lot of difficult decisions and took a controversial stance often. But I had a lot of admiration for him, and I knew I had to do a painting of him.
And so moving on to entertainers, there's Paul Robeson, another artist, activist.
Yeah. Taking a stance again. I think it's always about taking a stance that may not be politically correct or supported by a majority, but when you believe in something, you believe in it regardless. You know, I've heard too many times people say, well, can a million people be wrong? And the answer is yes. You know, and no attack on religion, but you know, when we talk about like Christianity, Christianity is the second largest religion in the world, practice. But we have the impression that it's the largest, but there's like, I think there's, the percentage is 40% more Muslims in the world than there are Christians. You know, and so I'm not saying that Christians are wrong, but I am saying that there are times when you take a stance, and at the time that Reubens took his stance, which was very brave, communism was not favored, and so it ruined the careers of many people. But Reubens stood stern and strong to his beliefs, and so again, I had to honor him for that because it affected his life. I did a piece for a show in New York at the Jewish Museum in New York University. And what it was based on, I had gotten a call because they wanted to use a couple of my other paintings in a show that was based on a relationship that Paul Robeson had with Einstein. And it's an amazing story when you find out. And even all the autobiographies or biographies written about Einstein, that Robeson is rarely, if ever, mentioned at all. But Robeson and Einstein were the best of friends. They communicated all the time. And finally, a book came out that revealed the secret. But what Robeson understood in that relationship is that the importance of Einstein's role when he came to America in particular. And so he was willing to keep it a secret because he didn't want to ruin Einstein's relationship or his reputation. But so I wanted to tell that because, again, I mean, he was an amazing man on so many different levels, but a lot of times people even today don't know who Paul Robeson is.
Absolutely. And now we'll go to the entertainers and athlete.
And my favorite part about this piece is there's a rabbit in the sky in the clouds, like staring at Marilyn Monroe. And that rabbit represents all the men that lust for her and the men that abused and mistreated her. So I think in the case of Marilyn Monroe, her tar baby was her beauty because she had more talent than people would acknowledge in her. You know, she could sing and she could dance and she could act, but no one looked at that. They looked at her curves, and that's a commentary for many women today. And so I think that's what I was saying, and she was the first person that came to mind when I thought about something like that. And again, it's like the other thing is the tar baby has nothing to do with race, and that's why it's like, you know, there are certain questions and certain things that I'm going to bring up, and I'm not going to ask why. I'm just going to do it.
And then Dave Chappelle.
I love Dave Chappelle on so many levels. Again, I was about to do a Jesus Christ tar baby. I had the paper ready, had my reference material ready to go, and I had gone on YouTube. I was doing some research on something else, and I stumbled across an old interview I saw of Dave Chappelle on the Actors Studio with James Lipton. And it's 2 hours of the most honest stuff you will ever hear anybody talking about Hollywood, the show business, and all that. But as I'm listening to him, he kept saying, "That's why I went to Africa." He said this happened. He said like when the show became so popular that they actually offered him $50 million. He said the first thing that came with that were restrictions on what he was allowed to do. His comedy would no longer be his comedy, but there would be a board that would decide what he could and could not say. He said that's why I went to Africa. And then he would talk about Hollywood and some of the things Hollywood has done as far as movies and and he said, that's why I went to Africa. And every time I heard that, I heard tar baby. And I'm like, tar baby. And I'm like, I admire anybody that has so much conviction and commitment to what they do as an art that they're willing to walk away from $50 million. I'm saying I probably wouldn't. In fact, I saw a preview for an interview with Martin Lawrence, Kathy Hughes on her channel, and I guess the issue has come up again. Why do black men always have to dress as a woman? And you can go through it. Dave Chappelle tells a great story about how in a movie he was doing, they came to him last minute with a dress. It was not in the script, but he said it would be really funny. And he said, it's old, everybody's done it already. He said, no, it's really funny. Such and such is done, and such and such. He said, that's what makes it old. He said, I'm not wearing your dress. He absolutely refused to do the dress. And so that became this YouTube thing, like, why are all the black actors, male actors, dressing as women? And in this recent interview I saw, and Martin Lawrence says, if you saw the check I got for Big Mama 3, you wouldn't ask the question. And it is like that, but you have to decide how important is it, and is your art more important than, you know, whatever, and you have to make those decisions. And in the case of Dave Chappelle, he's refused to dress as a woman. He's refused to yield to the comedy, the jokes that he made were making fun of something, and now he's finding that people are making fun of him, and that's when he said, I have to walk away from this. So I mean, like out of anybody, I just really have a lot of respect for Dave Chappelle.
And then Paul Reubens.
I love Pee Wee Herman. I love Pee Wee Herman. I did. I thought he was a comedic genius, and I'm like, I don't want to question the audience on what y'all do in your own privacy of your own homes or whatever. But it's like, let's get real. This man didn't really do anything wrong, but his career just ended abruptly. It was a poor decision. It wasn't that he masturbated, and he masturbated in a porn theater. Okay, he didn't masturbate on a playground with a bunch of children or anything. That would have made it really disturbing. But sometimes when guys go to porn theaters, that's what they do. I'm sorry. I haven't done it, I'm sorry. But so if I do Pee Wee Herman and I don't put the statement, it's like you're probably looking at him and say, well, his career, but I'm like, no. It's like, who hasn't done this? And who hasn't done this? Be the first to cast a stone. And that's what it's really about, because he pops up here and there and everything, but Pee Wee is gone because of a bad decision, but something that should not have altered his whole career.
And then Joe Louis.
I think, again, not passing any judgment on Joe Louis, but I think that Joe Louis, if you understand his history, was willing to compromise where Jack Johnson wasn't willing to. And in the end, Jack Johnson died tragically on a highway, but he died the way he lived. He died in his late 60s. He was racing his car, which he always did. There was another passenger in the car that could verify that nobody ran him off the road. He just missed the curve, went off the road, crashed. Jack Johnson died. His friend who was with him didn't, but he lived fast and he died hard. But that was the way he chose to do it. But Joe Louis was told, in particular when it came to his fighting skills or his fighting style, that once you knock down or knock out your white opponent, do not celebrate. Walk into your corner until the count. Never be seen ever in public with a white woman, and never be seen or photographed with Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson went to Joe Louis's camp when he was fighting Mike Smellings the first time, because he saw what Max Smelling's weakness was and told him what it was. But Joe Louis said, I cannot be seen, cannot be speaking to you, you have to leave. He turned around, went to Smelling's camp, told him what Joe Louis's weakness was, and Smelling beat him. So it's like, but I love Jack Johnson. I love Joe Louis, but the compromise in the end was, people don't know, when he died poor. And Max Smelling, who beat him, paid for his funeral. And so those are the decisions that we have to make. And they're not always going to be easy decisions, but in the end, I want to feel good about my decision. If I'm broke and I feel good about it, I feel good about my decisions, then I think I'm going to be happier than to be rich and feel like I've compromised too much. And I've gotten into that trouble often with my art, because people have said, why don't you paint more, happy trees or something. And I'm like, you know what? If I did a happy tree, I might do a figure hanging from a tree, and that's going to alter the whole happy tree. But I know that commercially, if I painted certain things, I would probably make more money. But it's like, I think there should be a relevance to your art. I've always felt that art should it should evoke some kind of emotion. If you hate my work, I've accomplished what I needed to accomplish. If you love my work, I've accomplished it. If you feel nothing, I have failed. And so if you look at this body of work and it does not speak to you on some level, or one piece does not speak to you, literally speak to you, then I think I've failed. And I would want to do it over again because I want to be able to create something that speaks to everyone. But it has to say something. If it's saying nothing, then it's pretty art, and I don't think I'm interested in doing that.
So we're going to go on and look at the tar babies of our community, those things that we're dealing with, grappling with within the African American community. And this piece is called Teenage Mother.
Teenage Mother actually changed. Originally when I did the piece, I wanted her to look forlorn and tired. Young mothers often have this, sometimes conception or perception that their children can give them the love that they lack from parents or from whatever. And I wanted to really try to show the struggle of being a mother. I wanted to share that to some degree, but then when I finished the piece, I kept looking at the little baby in her arms, and it wasn't rocking the boat enough for me. And so I think I may have sent you before, and I'm like, I need to change the baby a little bit. And that's when I made it into, the white eyes and the lips and the little braids, or like braids popping out of the head. I really needed people to stop and stare and hear more than what I'm saying, because it's too often in the media and how we're portrayed as parents, as mothers and fathers, but there's also the real responsibility of being a parent that we often take too lightly. So I wanted to address all that. I wanted, in this piece, I can say definitely I wanted you to feel uncomfortable. And if I offend, I'm okay with that, just as long as you don't want to hit me. All right?
And then to counter that and talk about the love between an adult black man and black woman, you've created the Black Love piece, which I adore.
It's all about love. I mean, it really, it's that simple. When I looked at this photograph, I don't know their story, but I saw Black Love, and I wanted to celebrate that. And also, again, how it's not often, we don't often talk about the love that we have in our community, the support we have in the family. And so that's what this piece is all about. It's very clean and straight to the point what Black Love is. And I mean, I was reading, I think yesterday I was reading what was said in the top of it, and I can't even connect with it. Like, what was I thinking when that happened? Because I'm reading this and I don't even make a connection. But at the same time, I look at it and I feel really good about this piece.
Yes. And now we look at Tar Baby, because again, we're such a race-based society, and this innocent story of the encounter between a rabbit and this tar-shaped baby on the road has somehow become attached to the African American community and the ills of that. And so tell us how this piece came about.
This, out of every piece that's in the show, happened the quickest. I woke up one morning and I knew what I wanted to do. And so it happened in 6 hours or less. It was probably less than 6 hours, because I knew I just wanted to do a portrait of Tar Baby. And I Googled Tar Baby to see what would come up. And so all the random thoughts that are written around it are just the things that I found when I Googled it. But I wanted to be, again, in your face, very simple. I don't even know, I don't think I've even read what all the stuff says around it, because I just, whatever was there, I wrote it down, because I wasn't going to interpret it or edit it or anything. It was like what I seen, but I wanted it to kind of be, this is what Tar Baby is, and this is what, if you Google it, this is what the information you will find. But there are so many levels, like even if you were to read or familiar with the book by Toni Morrison, Tar Baby, I reread the book. I didn't I thought I had read it before. And as I was reading it, I realized I was reading it for the first time, and I kept waiting for the connection to the Tar Baby story, and it really isn't there. It's a whole nother story. And so I really thought, after I was done with this series, like maybe I want to do a whole series on Black Love and still call it Tar Baby, but more do the interpretation of her story. But it's like if you Google it, you'll see all kinds of things. There's a great movie in the 70s. I'm trying to remember the title of it, but it's based on the whole Brer Rabbit, Tar Baby. It starred Philip Michael Thomas from Miami Vice, and who was really great at it. Barry White, the singer, and Scott Brothers. But it's partly animated and it's partly actors. It's a fascinating but a weird movie at the same time. It's something city or something, but I mean, I Googled that, and I actually I ordered it after I saw it when I Googled and looked at it one day, and it was a very amazing movie on so many different levels, but also at the same time odd. But if I can remember, I'll try to give it to her so I pass on the information. But Tar Baby, you look it up, there's so many different references to it, and that's just what this story is about.
And part of the references are also things that are stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we love watermelon. You address one of the stereotypes, African Americans and their affinity for watermelon.
Mm-hmm. And you know, the truth is, I love watermelon. But it's a great fruit, ain't it?
Yes.
I love watermelon, but I want it to be in your face. There's also a tribute to Kerry James Marshall and the faces, especially the little boy. I wanted a black face, and it wasn't because I love his work so much. But I wanted this again to be in your face. You know, I think it's really self-explanatory, and also at the times maybe some certain people offensive, but that's okay.
And so the title of the story is What is Your Tar Baby? Which implies that we each have one or many. And so you said you could not ask the question without answering it yourself. And so you've responded with my tar baby. So the question is, yes,
This is the last
Charly Palmer, what is your tar baby?
I don't know if you recognize how I was trying to not get this piece in the show.
I know. Reluctantly.
You know, I really tried to. I tried to like time it so that I could show her the piece, but it not be in the show, because this really, like, when I asked the question, this is what came to mind. It's like, what is your tar baby, Charly? What are you facing? What is your decision? And it had a lot to do with, I've never been necessarily successful when it's come to relationships. Part of it is just being impatient, being who I am. But I really thought about that and said, you know, it's a beautiful black woman. That's my tar baby. It's like trying to confront, trying to navigate, trying to figure out how all that works and whatever. But the thing that really became very disturbing was, in my mind, it was this romantic scene of me and Eve in the garden, and I'm offering her this apple. Yeah. And then it dawned on me, it's like, wait a minute, who offered the apple? And it's like, oh my God, the snake was the one that offered the apple. And I'm like, wow, what am I saying about myself? And when I began to examine that, I was really disturbed by that. I was really disturbed by the idea that I think that even like maybe my actions have been misleading. You know, and we're really starting to say, like, because again, it's like saying that the work that has happened here really is coming through me. I'm acting as like a vessel to these expressions. And so with that in mind, when work happens, there are times I'm looking at it and like, I'm not sure what I'm trying to say here. But maybe I'm not trying to say anything. But this was one that I had to do self-examination and say, what am I trying to say? And it changed the course of my life. You know, because it was like, okay, if I'm going to put this out there, then I have to do something about it. You know, but it's a difficult piece to look at. It's a difficult piece to look at. You know.
Well, we thank you for your honesty and revealing it. So I'm going to open the floor now for questions. Yes.
I noticed a lot of your pieces are of people who are not really contemporary, except for Barack Obama. I mean, it's like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and they're older Americans who are either no longer existing or. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
What's the thought behind that?
It wasn't conscious. You know, and then you think about it, I'm thinking about it, I think it's like, I guess, Pee Wee Herman, Dave Chappelle, Gates. But I love history, and I think that's what it's all about. It's another way of telling history. You know, I've always just been inspired by many of the people that came before. And so I think that's ongoing with my work. It's always that desire to, again, like in the case of Fannie Lou Hamer, it's like the idea is like, who was that? I think I heard President Obama mention her one day. And I began to wonder how many people know who she is. And it's that kind of thing. It's like I saw a really disturbing interview with, he's a Laker player, Artest.
Right.
And he was asked about Martin Luther King. And he didn't quite know who King was, you know, or what he had accomplished. But that's our fault as adults, you know, because we're beginning to let the story. Years ago, when Barbershop came out, the controversy because of the one joke about all Rosa Parks did was sit her butt down, right? People were really enraged by it, and it was funny. But it's funny if you know the history. And I'm thinking it was funny until I spoke to my 17-year-old nephew, who didn't know who Rosa Parks was and didn't know who Martin Luther King was. You know, when he said, hey, Martin Luther King, was he the one that started black colleges? And I'm like, okay, now I see the harm in that joke. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And so if our children don't know the history, then we can't make fun of those things if we want to. Because it's sometimes like, come on, black people, loosen up. Let's laugh a little bit. But we can't laugh if we don't know the history behind these amazing people. You know, then you can see the humor in it. You know what I mean? So I'm always going back to grab certain people so that, you know, the young people can have, like, I remember the first time I did, that's John, Above Your Head is Tommy Smith and John Carlos from the Olympics, 1968. And when I told that story to a group of teenagers, they were like really fascinated by that story and amazed by it at the same time. But it's like, you know what, you are so far removed from that because, well, you're not really that far removed, but you feel as if you're so far removed from what just happened 25 years ago or 35 years ago. Let me tell you the story. Let me tell you what they went through to get to you to where you are today. You know, when I look at things and I go to, like I've done works dealing with Little Rock 9 and what's going on with that high school today. And it's like, these young people obviously don't know the history behind the school because they wouldn't treat the school the way they do if they did that. So I think that's, for me, I'm always bringing up people that people need to know more about. And in the hopes that maybe they'll do their own research.
Sam?
I'm very interested in the gaze that most of the work has. The things that I'm familiar with on Brown Rabbit, his gaze is on the object. Each of these, the gaze is looking at us.
Mm-hmm.
I'd just like to know your rationale. Why you did that?
If anything, it's probably not conscious. But what I found in advertising, when I was doing a lot of advertising, photography, overseeing, art directing, is that people, like when advertisers often shoot a group shot of people at a party, no one's looking directly at you. Reason for that is it's less engaging to the viewer. When somebody looks at you, a lot of times people feel really uncomfortable and they want to step back. But if they're looking away from you, it's more inviting. You can ease into the scene. And I think that maybe on an unconscious level, that's probably part of it. I want that discomfort to some degree when I'm looking at you or when they're looking at you. You know, it to be inviting, but at the same time a little bit intimidating. I would think that's it, but quite honestly, a lot of times it's not conscious.
Excuse me, as an artist, I'm very interested in how you build your canvas. Could you tell us a little bit about how you build the canvas up, or how you plan what's going to go on your paintings?
I do work on canvas that's pre-stretched. What I do is, you notice most of them have those panels to it, a little panel piece, which might be either a canvas board or a piece of Luan, and I randomly place it. I don't have like ahead of time an idea of what piece is going to appear on there. So I'll randomly apply the canvas board or the panel, glue it on there, and then I'll gesso the whole surface, and then I'll start my piece. And most of my pieces either start with a sepia outline or a black outline, and usually it's just a block in of shapes, and then adding the detail to it.
This question might be a projection on my part or totally unconscious on yours, but I noticed that some of the paintings didn't have the tar baby image actually in it. And I came up with a theory, but yours is more important than mine. Why do you think you sometimes do and sometimes don't include the tar baby?
I know that the tar baby appears when I feel it needs to be there, or if I feel like, a lot of times I'm not conscious of it, but it's like this awareness something's missing, and that's the moment where I know that it has to be in there. In most cases, it's there, but where it's not appearing, it like in the Josephine Baker piece, with all that energy with the feathers and everything, it became too much to add into it. You know, for compositional reasons or something like that, it may not appear. And that may be the reason most of the time I don't want it to be crowded.
I see a much more consistent reason, so may I suggest it and ask you
Sure.
what your opinion is? I noticed that when we all have our tar babies, but I noticed that when an individual's tar baby was something very flawed in himself, not in the conditions of his life, not in the success of his effort, but very deep and very inner, there was no tar baby in the picture. And sometime I'd love you to go over it just in the order you gave them and see that. It was so consistent, and I began to project, it's going to be in this, it's not going to be in that.
May I chime in?
Yes, please.
Because I am a little connected to what she's about to say, what she just said, because for me, the ones that for me are the most resonant and scream the loudest is the image of, will you tell them I'll call back? That's from being mistaken. It is the image of the flawed, deeply flawed person who is at the same time revelatory. The tar baby is also light. To be entangled with him and then to relieve yourself from it is to be involved with freeing yourself from whatever your entanglement is and to find light or truth. So when people like who are really flawed, like Obama who is flawed, who are not gods, Lincoln who is not a god, and let me say by the end of his life, we don't know what he would have become because he was slowly understanding things. His later writings say that. It is the use of these images that are so, whose job is to live their life and to be that beacon, to be very flawed, and through their travails in life reveal to us what we need to look at. Obama is that, surely. He's like the key that opens the door for the next guy. And actually Lincoln was that as well. He was that as well. So those are the ones that really resonate to me. I mean, they all do, but these resonate because there are so many backstories and they directly relate to who the rabbit is, who the fox is. You know, the fox gets that peripheral kind of thing. He's chasing her, but he's very important because he spurs the rabbit into the dilemma that he gets into. It's a really important. So they are very, I think, primal.
I just wanted to talk just a little bit about the history lesson, which is really, it makes me also think about Jacob Lawrence. And Jacob Lawrence was a storyteller. And he understood, similar to what you have done here, which is if you keep the story together, then it's more likely to be seen as a whole. And I know that he did a great deal of focused works similar to this. When you look future-wise, and secondly, I'd like to say that what's interesting to me is that people like Paul Robeson could not be taught in public school. There were, particularly in the state of Virginia, there was a ban on teaching Paul Robeson. There was a ban on teaching Nat Turner. You know, it's like they were not included in the curriculum. We don't have time for that. This is a sideline. So they were, they've been really kept out of the curriculum. So it's really interesting to see them included in the story, and I think that that's really important. But when you look at this particular body of work, where do you see yourself going with this? You know, I know Jacob Lawrence, part of his expectation was that that his work would be kept together as a body. I know the Phillips Collection purchased a portion of it, and I think another major gallery purchased another portion of it. How do you see your ability to keep this together? Is it by creating a catalog or a book, or how do you intend to keep this work together?
You know, I want to let Myrtis talk about that a little bit, but I want to say from a spiritual place that my God has a sense of humor. I say that because my dear friend who I've been hanging out with all day referenced Jacob Lawrence today and my work. And then connection with the other part of this is that the conversation we had about not separating this body of work. So it's like God revealing itself in certain ways, like, okay, you're on the right course. And that's what I recognize a lot of times with the work. It's like, I'm not sure what's going on. And then this happens. It's like, okay, I'm on the right course. I can step away from this and not be concerned about where it's going. So if you could talk about it.
Well, yes, to your question. We recognize the importance of documenting this collection as a whole, and hence created this catalog. And then we've also in the process of touring this body of work. Now the works are for sale, but we are asking that upon acquiring a piece that you will loan it back to us. Jarvis Dubois, I think Jarvis he had to leave, but Jarvis Dubois is working with us to do just that. We're looking at historical black colleges, we're looking at museums, we're looking at university galleries to tour this body of work. It is a history lesson, and we have had groups come through during the course of the exhibition, one of which was from UNBC. And what was interesting about that group in particular is most of the students were African students. And so they were not familiar with who Angela Davis was. They just admired her hairdo. And so, hence the door was open for a conversation in history, African American history, with these students who were just really fascinated about who these people were and who they continue to be, as Dave Chappelle and the others who are living individuals in this work. So we understand the significance and the importance of what Charly has done here. And we ask anyone and everyone's help, if you have the ability to help us in our quest to tour this body of work and make it available, and for this dialogue to continue. And part of that dialogue is also to look at ourselves, the self-examination, the question he is posing about what is your tar baby, and to unite in conversation about that and surrounding that dialogue. So, question, please?
I have to say I've gotten a chance to see the work online, so I'm looking forward to see it real time in real life. But I think what's striking me most is the debate that this is going to create. Because I've been in the midst of some debates with people who have talked about Super Bowl commercials that they felt were racially offensive, or some other piece that's created some sort of debate. As opposed to having an honest conversation, some folks get very caught up in the embarrassment or how other people perceive it, as opposed to seeing what the real question is. So it made me start thinking as recent as this morning about the idea of what is your tar baby, because I've read about it on Wikipedia and I've heard the Brer Rabbit story, but it really added a whole different viewpoint of what this really means, and it really does take away the negativity that it brings. I think it really opens up the more positive aspects of what this is asking and how this is getting people to really start thinking about themselves. So I'm looking forward to what this will bring as far as the national dialogue or the global dialogue about what our issues are and how we address those issues. So kudos.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things is also is like there's two pieces that are in the catalog that you notice are not in the show. And I know there's a couple more pieces that are going to happen, because there's always those obvious people that I hadn't thought of initially. Like one of them came, and was it going to be the show, the Emmett Till?
No, you created it after.
After, yeah, I did an Emmett Till piece, and it's a painting. If you look at the catalog, it's a painting of him in his coffin when he was disfigured, and it was a difficult painting to paint because you see the photograph, and it's one thing to look at the photograph, it's another to study the photograph to try to recreate it. But that was a story, and then the other one was the controversy with Bishop Eddie Long. Although I'm not calling out anybody in particular, the secrecy and the struggles that we have in the black churches. and that, you know, we're good at keeping our secrets and keeping them contained, but every once in a while something is revealed. But often when it's revealed, it's discussed for a moment and then tucked away again. You know, but it was like, let me face this. Because we all have those stories. If anybody's been raised in a black church or near a black church, we have our little stories, but we don't really talk about them outside of our church. You know what I mean? And so I had those two pieces that happened after, and they were about tar baby.
And as I said to Charlie, oh my God, the babies just keep on coming.
Yeah.
He's created more. Let me go to this one.
As a artist and a writer, sometimes you're talking about, and the gentleman here talked about the idea of controversy, and other people will want to tell your story. And so I'm thinking that you should find your medium, if you're not a writer, to connect with a writer, to write your own story, your own words about what is going on with this development and this stage of your life. Whether it includes the things that led up to this or not, but this needs to be put in your words and in your story down so that it's understood the way you want it to be understood.
Well, that's been done. If I can speak on your behalf, in the artist statement.
Okay.
In the artist statement, again, referring to the catalog, Charlie has eloquently stated, you know, why this body of work was created, what he's addressing. I mean, he really contextualizes it beautifully. So I encourage you to read it and buy a catalog.
Are there any other foxes besides Dave Chappelle?
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back to, she had her hand up. Robbie?
I remember, I thought you were answering a question earlier about Barack Obama vis-a-vis your first inspiration for the show. My question then was that the first one you did? Was the Barack Obama the first one you did of this series?
No.
No.
Cornel West
Oh,
and the King and the Muhammad Ali were the first in the series. I'm trying to remember what was the first canvas piece. Obama may have been one of the first canvas pieces, but my initial, when I first started laying out the canvas pieces, I lay out 6 of them at the same time and start roughly developing them. So I can't say of the large pieces which was the first. But the turning point of the whole Tar Baby series was the Cornel West piece.
Sam?
Yeah, I had just asked, was Dave Chappelle the only fox in the series? I noticed he was a fox.
I saw him as the, what is he?
I think he's everybody.
He's everything.
Because
I didn't see him as I saw him as, I guess, everything.
Go past him.
You know, but I think, you know what?
Good point.
No, he's not the fox. He is the Tar Baby.
He's,
You know, yeah, because if you look at him, he's like the fox is looking at Dave Chappelle. And I think and I wasn't even aware until I just remembered that. My idea was that he was the Tar Baby at that point in this particular one. I can't say in any of the other ones, but in this one, that's why the fox is there. He's actually setting up the Tar Baby, you know. Sometimes I really have to go back and look at the work to see it, because I'm trying to remember, I think the fox appears in the Olympic piece, in the sky area, but I'm not certain. I think that the fox and the Tar Baby is in that piece, in a light silhouette, you know. So I have to go back and look at some of the work, because, you know, we were talking, someone had asked me earlier, a lot of times when the ideas come, they're coming out, you know, they're just flowing. And it's not like I'm cranking like a machine, but I'm having to release that one so I can go to the next one. And if there have been times I've been able to put work around my studio or whatever and look at it and study it. But sometimes it's done and it's got to go out. And so I don't get a chance to really look at it until, like, I've been here a couple of times looking at work and say, oh, that's really cool. I like what's going on in that area. You know, that kind of thing.
Any other questions? Well, I invite everyone to stick around, talk one-on-one with Charly, enjoy the work. And thank you all for coming.